This video is an extension of my previous one, the Treatise on the Future of Atheism. Tune in for a quick video speech. America is built on religion. It is said that Congress shall make no law respecting an establishment of religion. This statement has been used over and over throughout the past century to justify the breakdown of religion in public life, as it is seen as a constitutional issue. The mantra of the separation of church and state is repeated over and over again in some sort of triumphant manner by those who reject religious society. However, this understanding of the Constitution is mostly based on the facts of life of the present in a secularizing society with no grounded foundation in religion. Religion, in almost every matter, has been removed from public life. The error committed by this train of thought is that the key context that is missed out on is that the Constitution was a secular document meant for a religious people, and that it is wholly unable to function without those conditions. The word for this error, I'm not sure, like some sort of false equivalency perhaps, or an irrelevant conclusion. Simply said, it does not matter whether or not the church church and state are separate. Proponents of this ideology assume that simply because the Constitution makes claims regarding the establishment of religion, it is destined to be without it. Yet, through the onset of empiricism and the downfall of religion in the private sector of human life, the non-governmental life, the government enforced the lack of religion in public life. Throughout various Supreme Court cases such as Jacobson v. Massachusetts, the Supreme Court undermined the values of religion and the ability to express it in public life, simply because it could not support it. This historical trend was seen all over the Western world, of course, including France, and the results are clear. Now, religion has plummeted, and even those who claim to be from a faith do not live by it, or they simply do not exercise and are religious in name only. And so what is the problem, right? So proponents of secular society ask this question often when the secularization of America is noted. They see it as a good thing. Now, as has been established, religion and the belief in a system, and having a belief system, is not only important to keeping an individual fully human, it is necessary for uniting large swaths of people under one banner. The aforementioned contradiction between objective and subjective morality and atheism in the last video indicates that there must be a consistent moral message given to society and ingrained within each member. This forms the basis of society and is a function that must be maintained, not eliminated. The founding fathers, along with the other statecrafters of the time, realized the importance of religion and did not abridge the presence of theist sentiment in local legislatures wherein religious, especially Protestant faith, was required to hold office. And despite the slow secularization of society, even present in the deism of the founders themselves, the founders were deists of course, the world of the 18th and 19th century was far more developed than current modernity. It was assumed correctly that if religious belief was consistent in any group of people, that those who had affiliation with that belief were fit to serve. But throughout time, as the base amount of religiosity decreased, the private sector of religion, so to speak, was unable to survive the fights against the secular weaponization of the Constitution against them. With each and every loss in the courts and the retreat of religion into private life, of course not to be confused with the private sector, actual private sector, leaves America in a peculiar position. A position where the expectation of the government is not to interfere in religion, but in fact it has become one of the contributing factors to its fall, given the weakness in the religious regime. There are no provisions in America to foster a religious revival of any sorts, because the ever so powerful government is not built to do so. And neither should it, of course. Part of the beauty of the Constitution was that it was indeed a secular document in a theist time period. Yet it can only function to its full capacity and capability if and only if there is a certain moral caliber within the peoples it governs. With the realization that the empiricist tradition is hardwired into nearly every modern citizen, the next step is to realize that there is no way for religion to once again re-enter public life where it belongs and where it once lived, where it existed without doubt, without all of these different limiting factors. Once a unifying factor, it has now surrendered to secular government and is fading into obscurity. However, the path to solve this issue is not via government, but requires the defeat of government and the re-embracement of free association principles. The first two Great Awakenings in America were largely possible because the government took no active role in shutting them down, or, in general, shutting down the entrance of religion into public life or even politics. The harrowing issue in the modern day is that it will be essentially impossible to engineer a religious revival through public institutions like government-run schools, because that sort of activity would indeed go against constitutional principles. After all, case after case has reaffirmed that ideas like mandatory prayer and service is unacceptable in public school, lest there be one atheist student or parent who rightfully speaks out. Now, the obvious solution is to dissolve the government control over the way students are ordained into the empiricist tradition in the school system, and to allow a free market of choice in schooling across the country. If this were to happen, many avenues may open up again. Those with some religious background would again choose to send their children to schooling institutions which affirm religious principles and morality, all while teaching the results of empirical methods without necessarily undermining religious thought. Of course, the difficulty in this is that, say, a creationist school which denies some basic principles in biology will of course not be as effective as a school with evolutionism. This is an issue that these teachers would have to grapple with, whether to not address the evolution issue, or how to address it theologically if they do choose to do so. No matter what, the free market of ideas will make it so people choose the best schools anyways. Still, this is not a new opinion. Libertarians have been campaigning on this for decades. The economic arguments make sense, obviously. The best teachers would be able to lend their services to higher paying institutions, which would produce qualified students while also creating incentive in the general community to become good teachers due to the profit possible. Right now, teachers do not get paid that much. On the other hand, the ability to diversify schools outside of home districts means that schools will be able to give a meager but effective education to those without much money. But instead, using that opportunity of having lesser income students to train and utilize the influx of new teaching graduates who are, of course, who would be incentivized by the top bracket of teachers. This wouldn't eliminate the need for government schooling. Rather, it would necessitate the elimination of government requirements for schoolings on parents. Where libertarians have it wrong is the idea of dissolving the Department of Education and allowing for a total free market of ideas and schools. Of course, market pressures would tend to, for example, lead parents who want their children to be biologists to, not go to a creationist school. Yet, the issue in this policy is that there will ultimately be great divides in education simply by the policy decided upon by the local schooling institution. Say, in a random farming town in Oklahoma, there may be 3 institutions, one state-funded, one privately funded but religious, and one privately funded but secular. Given that let's say that the town has a high population of poorly educated but earnest religious parents, the likely occurrence would be that the children of that town would be sent to the second school of religiosity. Of course, while their value systems may be reinforced, which is important, their actual active education regarding important empirical principles may be neglected. Rejection of evolution, all that kind of stuff. This raises the question of, even with the free market of schools in a given area, if the consumers consistently make the wrong decisions, there is no benefit. Take a situation, hypothetically, in which there is a strict restriction of sugars and fatty foods in a state we can call Candyland. On the other hand, there may be a state nearby called Breadland. Completely arbitrary names, of course, but Breadland does not have strict restrictions on sugar and fatty foods. But still, right now, both countries have a similar level of health and fat levels. Maybe Breadland's a bit fattier. But in this story, policymakers in Candyland would point to Breadland and notice that its people are equally healthy and advocate for the removal of the restrictions for liberation purposes. Everyone wants more sweets after all. I can go for a sweet. But when the restrictions are lifted, the consumers of Candyland do not make the right decision, because they are not equipped to do so. Obesity rises, and now Candyland scores lower on average health than Breadland, despite the same amenities being offered. So, were the policymakers wrong? Were the restrictions necessary? These are the essential questions that must be asked when it comes to mandating government control on social institutions. The people will not always act in their own best interest, as game theory might suggest, and they need this direction. And in the void left behind by more influential religious public institutions and the death of the church, the government has its hands tied. It is irresponsible to give liberty to a population unequipped to accept it, no matter how noble the cause, for example, again, freeing up government or state-funded schooling institutions. So what can be done? This country, which was built on religious principles, is losing its foundation and is slipping quickly. I am firm in my stance that while the libertarian idea of opening up schooling completely is incorrect, the general principle of restricting government-imposed sanctions on religious activity is the root of the religious crisis of the 20th and 21st century. It is necessary to make sure that religion in the public sphere is maintained and actually abetted by the government, not decreased. Thank you. So, this work was interesting because I got to speak a little bit about, founding principles and the misconception people have about what our government is based on. And a lot of it is, you really have to look back, even like John Winthrop and stuff, but a lot of early legislatures for decades and decades made it so you had to be religious or Protestant of some sort to hold office. Our government has always had religious and moral people running it. And that's what made a lot of it work. The unsaid was done on the private side, right? The private sector, not private life, but the private sector, right? That would be the churches, the private institutions that are not related to government. But as the governance expanded, it's obviously seen so much more done. Anyways, yeah, comments down below. 12 minutes. Signing out.